you guys, it's a live recording of Hallway Conversations! Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Richard Mouw has a wonderful book titled The Life of the Mind. It's a short but important book, and I encourage you to read it. Chapter 11 in that book is one I've read many times. It's titled Safe Spaces for Playing Around. In that chapter, Mouw says, quote, safe spaces are essential for intellectual explorations, and he shares a vignette of having a hallway conversation with a colleague that often concludes with the colleague stating, well, I have to get back to my office and play around with a few ideas. I think the concept of playing around with a few ideas captures what we're trying to do. Our deep hope is to create safe space for all of us to learn together, and our desire is that you might all be encouraged in your work as you go back to your classroom, your staff room, boardroom, or your hallway, and we hope you play around in the sandbox of ideas. And while teaching and education is a serious business, we try not to take ourselves too seriously. Whether on the podcast or in the hallway, we not only like to poke fun and laugh with each other and at each other, but we also carry each other's burdens, and we love each other. And we think this is part of what it means to live in Christian community. If you're new to Hallway Conversations, the general format is that one of us brings a question, we explore our own thinking. We also appreciate getting questions from you, our listeners and audience. So if you have time in the future, please email us or send us a recording of your question to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. So Dave and Abby, one of the things, so I'm on Twitter, and one of the things that I've noticed, so Twitter can be a bit of a cesspool, you know that.
This is true.
It can also take up a lot of your time. But one of the things that I've noticed on Twitter, sort of in my going through it, that has been, and I try not to take Twitter too seriously, but one of the things that I have taken seriously lately, especially in the last 2-3 weeks, even more than the last 2-3 months, is a sense of teachers being discouraged, of literally quitting their jobs and leaving, and seeing teachers declare, I did it, I quit, I'm finally out, and just all these comments underneath that are like, way to go, way to get out, and it's like, I'm way happier, and that concerns me on a number of levels. As a teacher educator, as someone who loves education, who puts high value on trying to care for our teaching community. So my question is, in thinking about, so I found myself thinking about my own journey into education. And so my question isn't necessarily to address those tweets, but maybe to call ourselves back, even to encourage each other. Can you share a little bit about what brought you into teaching? Can you share a little bit of like why teaching? And then maybe what kind of, as people are leaving, what keeps you teaching? Like, so why teach? And then why keep going? And so, Abby, I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Okay. Well,
can you share a bit of your story?
This is so interesting because the reason I started teaching is actually in this room of live recording, right? So I worked for someone back there at the swimming pool in Rock Valley, Iowa for a long time, and I learned to teach by teaching swimming lessons, right? Nice. Alyssa and I were in the training pool at the 3-foot of Rock Valley Public Pool, and that's where I got hooked on the idea of you teach them this, and then you teach them this, and then you teach them this, and then they put it all together and they can swim. And it was like this cool, like, oh, I didn't know you could like actually teach them to swim in 2 weeks. It was amazing, right? You get hooked on that feeling of you do all these little things and then they put it all together and it's this moment of like discovery. And so I'd say that's still the thing that I love, right? The thing of, so I'll just relate it to my seniors. We spent the whole week, I canceled class, my 12 o'clock class this week, and I met with every student in groups of 5. You guys saw us in the conference rooms, right? So they had to we just did a whole module on adolescent development, and they had to become an expert in one issue that affects adolescents, and then relate it to 2 domains of development and teach their classmates about it, right? So we had put together all these things. They took all that research and all that learning, and they dove deeply into a topic, and then they literally taught their peers. And the level of engagement and expertise that they showed and the way they reacted to each other and just the professional camaraderie, right? That putting it all together that I saw in each of those presentations. It's the same concept. It's the same phenomenon of putting all those little pieces of learning to swim together and then they can swim across the pool. Right? Like, it's the same thing. It's the magic.
How about you, Dave? You think about kind of journey into teaching. Can you share a bit about that?
So I was bound and determined not to become a teacher. Of course, and I started as a student here as a computer science
teacher.
teacher.
What were you bound and determined to become?
Anything but a teacher.
Okay, all right. Okay, fair, good, fair.
No, I started as a computer science major, and that's probably not surprising given my love of educational technology today and all that. And I loved taking programming classes. I could show you the room where I was first on the World Wide Web. It was just down the hall from where we are right now, right? Like I could show you where it happened. That makes me sound like a geezer, I know, but like I have a clear memory of the first time I was on the World Wide Web. But after that first semester, it was clear to me that I liked people more than machines, and calculus disagreed with me, I'll say. And I knew I was going to take another 5 semesters of upper level math, and that just wasn't in the cards. So like many people, I went to career development and asked questions and took surveys, and of course, what am I born to do is become a teacher. And I have teachers in my family. My mom was a teacher. I've got several aunts and uncles who are teachers or administrators, so you've seen behind the curtain kind of what this work is. And I said, that's not for me. And I was encouraged, just go take introduction to education. Like, sure, I'll just go take, and of course you never look back, and here I am 20 odd years later, right? And it's amazing how sometimes that captures your imagination. And I guess what really is compelling to me is the people in education. I said I prefer people to machines. That is still true. Much as I love the technology, I love the shiny things. I think that's really what draws me in. And still, the opportunity I have now, working with future teachers or practicing teachers in our master's program, the people are the best part of this. And I think that's really the hard thing when I hear your story, Matt, about people who are leaving this profession. I've seen that too. Like that pains me, because it's like these are stories of people who just, for whatever reason, the systems at work are making it too difficult for them to keep doing this.
Yeah, no, and I think when I read those, all kinds, you think about creation, fall, redemption, restoration, you just think the brokenness. So there's something broken somewhere along the line that when having to choose between making an impact on children's lives or your own self-care and your own well-being, that people feel like there's only one choice. Like, I actually don't have a choice. Like, I need to get out. And I think that's what I don't know the whole story. I'm not going to, but just how did we get here, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think that's what makes me sad. And you think about, I think about, as I was thinking about this question myself, I've shared a bit on the podcast. Like, I would have been the student you were talking about in the staff room to your colleagues, be like, that Matt Beamer's kid. And I was not a good student. I didn't take it seriously. I tried to put on this veneer of someone who didn't care about school, and I didn't really. I had a lot of wonderful role models in my life who, didn't go to university, and so. Yeah, part of my story is I actually dropped out the first week of my senior year. Like, I was sort of done with it for different reasons. But when I was in grade 8, you can imagine, sorry to take you back in a time machine, kind of this jean jacket wearing, old high tops, terrible mullet.
Did you really have a mullet?
It was terrible. It was terrible.
He's Canadian.
I no. Because I care for you, I will not show you a picture of that.
It was bad. It was really
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways. So in grade 8, I really tried to put on that mask of not caring, and yet I would come home at the end of the day, take the bus home, and I'd come home often to an empty house. And I'm the youngest of 5. I have a sister who's 8 or 9 years older than me who loved reading. She had all these books in her room. And when nobody was home and I get home from school, I would go down to her bedroom and I went through my love of reading came from reading my sister Margaret's Agatha Christie series. Like, it was there. I loved it. But I didn't tell my sister that I stole her books. My mom didn't know, but I just loved it. And so I went into high school, kicking and screaming, grade 8, started grade 8. I was the beginning of high school where I lived. And I had this teacher, Jane Whitty. And Jane, if you're listening, God bless you. Honest, she's probably not. But anyway, she was an amazing teacher. And I would be pretty disrespectful in that class. And but she would have us do these amazing writing assignments. And I was like, this is amazing, but I can't tell anybody. And I'd hand them in. And then I'd be like, I don't care. This is stupid. And in one of those kind of classic 14-year-old moments, kind of like your students doing research project on adolescence, like I was so classic that way. She literally just kind of grabs me when I was being disrespectful, and she loved me, and I knew that. She grabbed, and she literally just walks me to the door, and she takes me out in the hallway, and she's like, and I still remember her words, Matt Beamers, I'm on to you. I know you love reading. I know you love writing. And you better become an English teacher or I'll be so sad and mad at you. And so the question is, why did I become an English teacher? Because Jane Whitty told me to become an English teacher. And that's the truth. You know, that's one story of many stories in my life. And I remember at one point, you know, like I showed up at Dordt. I never visited this place. It's the only place I could really get into. God bless Dordt. Which is why I will always have a bit of gratitude for this place, because they took a risk. And I remember that. They took a risk on Matt Beamers. They should have said no. And I end up fall under the mentorship of people like Dave Scalhoff and Jim Scott. And they just loved me no matter what. And that just as I grew up. And so that's kind of what got me into teaching. But I guess I want to follow up with you guys a bit. Like, you know, like what, you know, good projects and great students are kind of all, you know, we can tell stories about what keeps us going. But the reality is the last, especially 18 months, has been excruciating for many teachers in this room. You know, it doesn't mean, and they can be good and hard, right? Two things can be true, right? It can be so hard, and yet I know there's been a lot of goodness through the grace of God in these classes. But what about like on those days, or like I can actually think in the mid 2000s, we're having a whole year that was actually really hard. But how about for you guys, sort of what sustains you, and like even for these wonderful educators here who, you know, we're counting down the days maybe to try seeing just a couple of days of reprieve from the onslaught of teaching. And what does care look like for you? And what keeps you going in the profession when so many people are opting out? Abby, can I come back to you? Sort of where's your motivation?
Oh, man. I think it comes down to faith, right, for me always, which feels a little cliche, but is very much. So for context, I handed in my dissertation last week.
Woohoo!
And I had to write the acknowledgments of it, right? And it's just like, how do you even possibly try to sum up all of that?
So much.
And the acknowledgments of it. But part of what I wrote in there and is true for me really is I feel like this is my work to do, right? Like this is part of my calling. It's an outgrowth of the love I have for people, for kids, and I said too, you know, when I was talking about my kids and that acknowledgement, because it took pieces of me away from them, but I do hope that it's also a model of good work, right? And there's such a reason why I care so much about education, right? So the people that get to pour into them, I always tell my students when they graduate, and I mean it wholeheartedly, that I feel so good about the teachers that will be in my kids' classrooms.
Yeah.
And that's part of my goal, whether that's selfish or not, too, I think, right? Like, I just know what a difference their teachers make for them. I know the things they've done. I've had conversations with them. The first time I went into a student teaching conference actually happened when my oldest was a second grader, and I had a student who I taught in high school who had my daughter, and I got to listen to her pray for my kid, right? Yeah. Like, so thinking about how that all circles around. And when I think about my own kids, when I think about other people's kids, I think about my nieces and nephews and people I love, right? it's that keeps me doing what I do. Yeah.
I guess I'll piggyback right on that because that's what I was going to say, right? Like the depth of what we're doing here,
Right.
training future teachers or working with practicing teachers, like that is not lost on me. The privilege that I have to be able to speak into people's lives as they're discerning their calling, whether they're going to be a teacher, whether they're discerning whether they're going to continue in this, whether they're discerning a new path for them if they're starting a master's program and they're going to look for a new job as a result of their new learning. That's not something I take lightly.
Yeah.
It's kind of, this is holy work in that
It
sense
is.
too. Right?
It is.
Yeah. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I was almost getting emotional as you were talking, Abby. I was actually thinking about somebody named Brenda Wind. So Brenda, if you're listening, God bless you. We had a daughter who was, I could cry. We had a daughter who was going through, a hard time. She was in grade 8 at the time and was our daughter's homeroom teacher, so kind of her main teacher at the school she was at. And Bev and I were, it was just hard for us, and we're sort of like, man, like this is hard. Like you can't do this alone. Mm-hmm. And I can remember us at one point sort of, talking to Brenda about it and just basically saying to her, like, can you help us? Can you speak truth into our daughter's life? And I remember her saying, like, hey, like Matt and Bev, like I got this.
Yeah.
And I guess I say that as an encouragement to you. Like I think about, like, what if Jane Whitty wouldn't have been there?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or what if, Ed Bolins was another teacher in my life? If he opted out of teaching, and again, I want what's best for them, and if what's best for these teachers is to opt out, they need to actually do that because we love and care them. You have to trust people with that. And I think about that, so I think about that in this group, right? Like, so Jane Whitty was that for me, and Brenda Wind was that for our daughter, and I know without knowing you, and I don't know you, that you are that person for someone. One of the things in my Ed 300 class that I say to students, we have a check-in. We have our, what did I say?
It's philosophy of ed.
Philosophy of ed, yeah. Sorry, Ed 300, my philosophy of ed class, is that we have a check-in question every day. And one of the check-in questions is, that I asked recently is, think of a teacher that made a difference in your lives that that if they saw you today, they'd want to know about you, and like they're still your teacher. Mm-hmm. And I know there's names partly because I know a little bit, I know some of the people in here, even though I don't know you, that your names have been mentioned in that. And so that idea of like what sort of keeps me going is, I think, the faith and trust that maybe it's sacred work, that maybe God is calling me, and I say that humbly, not arrogantly, to be that person in someone's life, is to say, like what if I wouldn't have been at Dordt? And the flip side of that is, think about all the students that have blessed you that way.
Yeah.
Like Lindsay sitting right here, she was in my class last semester. Sorry to put you on the spot, Lindsay, but like she was such a blessing in my class. Like the things she wrote about her faith and teaching, and it's like, man, if I wouldn't be at Dordt, I wouldn't have got to know Lindsay. Like the blessing she goes, right? And so it goes to think that, like I might be that for someone, but that student also might be that for me. And so I think that's what keeps me going a bit.
What I'm hearing you say then, like just that sense, the gravity of what we get to do, and I always say that we get to do this, right? The gravity of what we get to do as Christians in education, you can't take that lightly. It really matters.
Yeah, it does matter.
It does.
Yeah, no, it absolutely matters. And to know that, and I guess that's part of the encouragement for each of you is to know that you are the answer to that question for someone in your class right now, and for someone that maybe you taught 10 years ago.
That's good. Okay, I'm going to shift, and we're going to go to questions.
Yeah.
Okay, first one, where can I get Dave's shirt?
I've got more concerns about the person who wants the shirt than I do
So for our listeners who aren't in the room, the shirt that I'm wearing this morning is navy blue and covered with pink flamingos.
I love it.
And when I was getting dressed this morning, my wife saw me taking the shirt out of the closet. She goes, "Oh, you're going to be that guy today." Honey, I'm that guy every day. I believe this was an Old Navy purchase.
Okay.
So
There
if
you
you're
go.
interested,
There you go.
There you go.
it's a look.
Things I never thought we'd talk about on the podcast. All
Just
right.
never
Right,
know.
because they never see our shirts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey. I have a face for radio, as they say. This one, I want to bring this one up because I think this is in response to one of our early episodes,
Okay.
Matt. So
Okay.
the question was, do I really have to tell my students not to color? And I feel like I should explain because I think one of our first episodes we were talking about learning targets. And I'm a big fan of learning targets. I learned a lot of this from Matt working with him, and this whole concept of we should be really clear on what we're actually trying to teach students, and then our assessment practices should follow our learning targets. Right, like it should tell you this is what we're trying to hit. This is the target, and that's then what we should be assessing. And my flippant comment was something like, "Teachers, if you're assigning coloring, what is the learning target?" And I think this is a question in response to that. And I'm sorry if it's somebody here that I offended. I'm sorry.
If the coloring is part of something bigger, it's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
But it
right.
shouldn't just be that.
If the assignment is coloring,
My college students color sometimes.
mine do too.
I know. But it's more, it's inside something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. I'm going to do another one.
Please.
Matt, I don't know, do you want to be put on the spot?
Yeah, I actually haven't seen these
No,
questions
you
because I don't
haven't.
have my reading glasses
Okay.
with me.
True
fact.
I'll answer it too, but talk
Okay.
about a healthy risk you took in the classroom. So do you want me to go first? Because I talked
Yeah,
about it already.
okay.
Okay, you
Sounds
think.
good. All
All
right.
right. So I have my Education 135 students.
Which is
Good, thank you, Intro to Ed Psych. And we actually just did this too, so I have it fresh in my mind. The first time I taught that course, they have to write a paper about development, right? And they have to choose kind of a age range, and I really wanted them to talk to real people. So a teacher and a student in the age range they wanted to teach, and I was just so hesitant logistically how that would look. And so I did not almost do it, and at the last minute I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it, and I assigned it, and it was by far the best part of the assignment, and for many of my students the best part of the semester was that they got to talk to a real teacher, they got to interview a real student, and they wove that into their paper. And each year, for those who don't know a teacher or don't have access to a student in that age range, last night I just brought my 3 kids to campus, and we met some students in the grill area, and they got to interview my students. My students get to talk to college kids, so they think that's really fun.
Yeah.
And I hooked them up with different teachers that I actually know a lot of teachers, it turns out, so it works. So friends of mine from different age ranges, some of you in the room maybe, I've asked to do that. And it actually is so rewarding for most of the time to the teacher as well as my student. So that was a healthy risk that I'm really glad that I took because it worked out very well. Yeah.
Okay, so truth be told is I'm not a huge risk taker, and so I think that's the administrative side coming out of me of somehow Matt, as a school leader, you're always, and this is true of teaching too, you're always managing risk, right? You're always assessing the risk of something, and so I think not necessarily in a positive way that might come out in my teaching, sort of like is it worth it, but. So this is going to be like, I'm thinking about stories about the time I took a small group of students to like the toughest downtown east side in Vancouver, and we made lunches and handed them out, and that was a wonderful experience. But I was so nervous, and there was a couple of incidents where I was like, "Thank you, Lord, like your grace is really apparent right now." And so I've done things like that, But I think I keep coming back to a bit of Dave's line where he quotes Parker Palmer, you teach who you are.
yes.
And so, Lindsay, you can, if I don't do this, you can totally hold me accountable to this. But I feel like teaching, I think one of the things that makes teaching so exhausting, folks, this is tiring work, it's exhausting, is that in teaching, you are in some ways making a profession of faith every day in front of your students, right?
Yeah,
You're
that's right.
professing who you are. You're making a profession of faith in front of your students. And in doing that I find teaching is an exercise in vulnerability. Maybe you don't feel that way, but it's like you are putting yourself out there every single day, and people are forming judgments about you, and you have no control over those judgments. And so you're putting yourself out there. And so I feel like the act of teaching in its own way
In itself
is
is a risk.
it is not for the faint of heart. You know
that's
that.
right.
It is
Yeah.
not for the faint of heart. You are, and I think the risk I think the risk maybe that I for me teaching who I am and putting high value on relationships is trying to share a bit of who I am through my teaching, to embody that, to share a bit of my stories of the dumb mistakes I've made, and I'm sharing that school wasn't easy with me, like to try to bring my authentic self to the classroom each day, and to know that I don't have it all figured out. I didn't then, certainly, and I don't at 49. And it just reminds me of this line from, I think it's from Eugene Peterson. I think it's this idea of a long obedience in the same direction, right? Of trying to model that to my students and being open about my struggles and trusting that they don't take advantage of that, right? That those stories are shared in confidence. And so I feel like, that risk of trying to be myself,
it's a good one,
and to give a little less control, feels, I guess, is an answer.
Good answer. Good
job. I'm exhausted.
Let's go in a different direction here. The question is, how often should curriculum be updated?
Ooh.
How often should curriculum be updated? My cynical answer is always. It should always be updated. But that's not a helpful answer. I don't know. I have kind of some thoughts on that, right? Like based on experiences I had at different schools that I've taught at, where we maybe had like a curriculum wheel, and so every 6 or 7 years, every subject comes around again. And I think there's something healthy about reviewing curriculum that way. Yeah. But I don't know that we need to like throw out everything and start with something new every time either. I don't know. You guys have thoughts on that?
I think about my own practice, right? And the answer is every time I teach something.
Right.
Right.
There's this mental...
Like the context has changed, or I find a new reading, or... it's a constant tweaking.
I guess for me...
But I don't teach K-12, so...
I guess I'm thinking of what do you mean by the word updating? Like, I think I would say that, again, in not knowing you, if I came and watched you teach a lesson, on Monday, and I saw you teach the same lesson a year from now, it wouldn't look exactly the same, right? You're always sort of in the process of updating or different. Like my class this semester looks different than last semester. Part of it's the dynamics. It's the students in the class. It's what are they bringing out of you. It's all of a sudden you
see their faces.
You see their faces, right? It's you're making a triangle. Oh, it looks like this student or this. We need to talk more about this, and other times it's like, no, I don't feel like we need to do that this semester because it feels like we're already there. We've had that discussion. I think there's something to be, and I do think there's something to be said for like, man, you need to teach something a few times before. Like, I'm in my 4th time of teaching Introduction to School Leadership, a grad ed course. Guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I'm finally sort of understanding it, and it's my 4th. Like, it just takes time to really, it's going to grow. And so I'm updating it as I go. At some point, though, like we read a book by Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. It's a great book. It's a wonderful book. At some point, though, that book, even though it will be effective, at some point it'll be like, I think we need something a little more present, or we need, like the times we live in call for a different discussion, right? And so I just think you're always assessing, like, what's the context in which I'm teaching this? And I think that's, for me, the bigger question is not about updating, but is how often are we reflecting on our practice and our curriculum and assessing, does it still hit the learning targets and meet the needs of the student? And the concern for me would be more if we're not reflecting on it, that's a bigger thing.
I appreciate
Does that make sense?
Totally, because I'm thinking about it like, okay, I've taught Intro to Ed, Introduction to Education, I think I've taught it 16 times now, right? And there comes a point where it's like, okay, maybe I need to just put everything back on the table and say, what should I keep doing? What should I stop doing? But I totally agree with what you're saying. Oftentimes I feel like it takes me at least 3 times teaching something before I feel like I really got my hands around it. Because the first time you're just trying to figure out what this is. And the second time you're fixing everything that was broken the first time you taught it. And then the third time it's like, oh, okay, maybe I know what's going on here. And so I think, the reflection is, I think, the key to this, right? Just being mindful about what we're doing and why am I doing it that way.
And if we're talking about updating like the whole curriculum, let's just name that is a significant amount of work that takes a significant amount of time and a significant amount of energy. And if we want that to happen, and I'm saying this as a former principal, probably didn't always do this really well, we need to give people the time to do that. Like, we cannot say, hey, you keep on doing everything else in your job, and now we're going to add this. I think one of the things, and I say this again as a school principal, if we're going to add those big things like updating the Bible curriculum or the language arts curriculum, and we're going to task someone to do that, then I think we have to have the courage to say, we're going to add this. What are we going to take away from that person? We cannot just keep, I mean, this goes back to the other question of why are people sometimes leave, or, on the trend to leave?
Mm-hmm.
Is because we know, and you all know this, the plate is the same size as it was 5 years ago, 10 years, 20 years. That plate doesn't get any bigger. And you just keep adding stuff onto that plate, well, pretty soon it's going to start spilling over the side. And I think if I'm going to, and I say this again, as a former leader in Christian education who's been in it for 28 years, I think Christian schools have this tendency to just keep add. And I think we do have to have the courage to say, if we're going to do this, we have to stop doing this. It's really easy, especially as a school principal, talking about myself, to add stuff, cool things to the school. Okay, but I think the harder thing and the more courageous thing is to also say, what are we going to stop doing? And so update it if we're going to do it, give people the time to do it so they can do it well, so that it meets the mission and vision and be faithful to the work we're called to do.
For sure.
All right. Very important question. Any suggestions for a first-year teacher wanting to drink coffee but simply doesn't like it black? Any suggestions to make it less of an acquired taste but fulfill my need for caffeine? Okay, I'm going to show you something here. I don't know who asked that question. This is my favorite coffee creamer. Okay, International Delight Caramel Macchiato. I highly recommend. Anyone else? Yep, I see some nods.
Yeah.
Yes. So if this is you who asked that question, this is my answer to your question right here. We can put it in the show notes, maybe. I don't know.
Put a link.
You know what?
There you go.
There was a question on here. One of you mentioned it. I'm not going to answer this because I could get in trouble for it. Someone was like, what's the difference between the Canadian education system and the American education system? I'll tell you one of the things is why don't people hear more people drink coffee with cream in it? Like, this is a regular thing. And I was like this question makes sense to me because it's like, no, put cream in your coffee. You will thank me. Your life will be fuller, more enriched. You're welcome. All right. That's the best. That is the best decision you're going to make today. Is add flavor.
You're welcome.
To your coffee.
The other thing I would add to that is don't drink the swill that's in the staff room.
Oh,
so just bring your own coffee from home. That solves most of your problems.
Get it Keurig.
Totally. Any other questions you see there, guys?
What do we got? Let's do something. I got one more that's a little more serious. Okay, so you guys are both secondary educators. I also taught middle school at least. Okay, the question is around final exams. So what's the trend on final exams in secondary ed? Are we seeing more projects, or is there still value in semester exams? Put you all on the spot here. I mean, I have opinions about that.
Yeah.
Well, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I tend to do exams in lower level classes, right or wrong. I think that's just my thinking, right? Because I think of my intro classes as surveys and knowledge, right? Versus my upper applied classes where I tend to use projects because that's more of what we are doing, right? Because they're taking all the knowledge and they're applying it to deeper scenarios.
No, that's what you're doing currently at the college level.
At the college level.
So and I agree with you about that because that's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
Too.
And so I guess I would think of it at the secondary ed level of what is the learning target here?
Yeah.
Is this a I'm thinking literature because that's my world, right? So is this a survey course, right? Do I want them to know about a variety of American literature authors, right? And if so, then it makes sense that I have some sort of factual survey type semester exam, right? Or am I focusing primarily on skills of literary analysis, for example, in which case I'm probably going to trend toward a paper or some other sort of project type work. Maybe it's both. Maybe I have to break my exam into pieces and do all of those things to cover all of the learning targets that I'm trying to reach. So I think the answer is the same as my higher ed, which is what am I getting at?
Right.
Right.
What's the learning target, and how do I design an assessment to match that?
Yeah, I think one of the cooler final exams was, just a colleague of mine, Sean, brilliant teacher. I think it was a biology science class, upper level. and he gave his students an option. I think this is how it went. He'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he gave students kind of the option of like, you can take a traditional exam, like pen and paper exam, or you can take you can lead a dissection in a grade 3 or 4 class. So you have to teach these students everything that's going on. You have to take everything you've learned this year and lead this, and you'll be assessed on the teaching and the learning, and so it was like sort of this option of like, hey, you can teach people what you know, or you can demonstrate your learning through. And I just thought, I love the idea of giving students options, which is, I think, what's the learning target in my history class, history of education class, philosophy class. At the end, instead of a written exam, I'm trying to make the classes tangible as, real work, real need, real people. So, a lot of these are juniors and seniors that are about to apply for jobs. Some of them are literally months away from applying for jobs. And so as they write their philosophy we write the exam as the semester goes on. So they have to write a 3-4 page paper every 2 weeks, and that forms the philosophy of education, because the goal is to be able to then edit that into a 4 or 5 page paper when they begin applying for jobs. It's like, hey, here's my philosophy of education, because a lot of schools ask for that. And then in addition to that, they have to schedule a 15-minute face-to-face interview with me.
Nice.
And it's not as much an assessment as, hey, I've been a principal, I've given tons of these interviews. We're going to do a 15, 20-minute interview, and I'm going to ask you the questions I asked last year, a year or two ago, as a principal, just to give you practice around your philosophy, the elements of a philosophy of education. So, traditional questions around worldview, but around classroom management, about pedagogy, your view of the student, your view of the teacher, all those things. So that I literally will take them from the questions that I use, and so that kind of functions as a final exam. And I do, like, in the end, it depends is the answer, but I do think the learning target, I was at a school, a wonderful school, who for seniors said, if your GPA doesn't go down second semester of your senior year, you don't have to take final exams. Well, then the question for me is,
what's it worth?
Yeah, so what's the learning target of those exams? Is this about compliance and behavior? Is it about demonstrating learning? And if you do that at your school, I'm sorry, I don't mean that as a criticism. I thought it was a great idea. I was all in on it. Just in hindsight,
Right.
I think that's why it's like, what's your philosophy of assessment? What's the purpose?
I guess I'd pick up on that too. My wonder, coming back to the learning target, right? Like if I want students to be able to win on Jeopardy, I'm going to write a particular kind of an exam. And if I mean, really,
that's a good
right?
goal.
Wow,
Seriously,
that's awesome.
right? I mean, because if it's about atomized, little specific facts that they can
Right.
recall off the top of their head,
Yeah.
I'll write a particular kind of test.
Yeah.
If I care about what our friend Daryl calls 60-year learning, not stuff that matters for 60 minutes while they're in class or for 60 days till they take their exam, but 60 years, if it's stuff that matters for the rest of their life, you write a very different exam
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Right? So I have no problem with the exam, but I would encourage people to think about what are we aiming towards.
Right.
I also think, if I think about final, or any assessment, actually, I'm not going to talk about final exams, and I guess this is for any of you to consider and engage in age-appropriate ways. What are there ways in your assessment to also measure for the mission and vision of the school? Right? How is that, like, how do we use our assessment tools and integrate, right? If you think about a mission and vision statement, like, this is our promise statement to put all the resources into achieving this and do this in our classes. How do we know that we're actually succeeding in that? So to think about, is there a way to have mission, vision based questions as part of your assessment practice? So,
Good question.
anyways.
You got one more?
No, I think we're good.
I don't know. Thank you guys for asking questions.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot more interesting, I hope.
All right. Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us in the hallway today. Thanks for your good, God-delighting work that you're doing in your communities, and we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of this week. Finally, we'd like to send you into your day and this week and this school year with this blessing. So to our listeners and to our audience, who we are so thankful for, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Have a good week, everyone, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening. This is always the part, like if I don't stop recording right away, sometimes something funny happens afterwards, and I'm like hoping something's going to happen. No, I won't do that.
What is your honest opinion on flamingos? Came in later.
Honest opinion on flamingos? Okay, I was a middle school science teacher for a lot of years, so like flamingos fascinate me. Do you know this about flamingos? They're actually white. They are not pink by nature. It's because of the food they eat that they turn pink.
Are you sure? Is this like one of those things like, what color is the dress?
No!
Come on.
Don't do
Okay,
that.
all right.